She seems madder than a Mad Hatter. Hey guys and gals, it's your buddy Drew from Living History's Mysteries and Ferocious Feline Productions. You know, everybody's familiar with Abraham Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln. I would say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the most popular and beloved president America has ever known. But after his assassination, even more so than before, it seems that Mary Todd made a not so popular name for herself, constantly contacting mediums to speak to her deceased children, to speak to her deceased husband, spending money extravagantly like there was no end. And after a while, her only living son decided to do something about it. And what he done went down in history. Check this out. This is good.
Mary Todd Lincoln was a pain in the ass, and her husband knew it. The 19th century First Lady was described by those who met her as, quote, imperious, proud, aristocratic, bitter, as well as haughty, high-strung, and a terror. But what if you married one of the greatest presidents in the history of the United States, had 4 kids with him, witnessed his assassination, and failed to attend his funeral due to grief, watched 3 of your children die before they reached adulthood, and as a gift for going through menopause, your only surviving child and firstborn son sticks you in an insane asylum? How would you feel? Honest Abe was devoted to his wife, but he recognized that some people had a, strong aversion to her. Hell, the woman alienated half the people she encountered. Letters he wrote as a congressman show him chastising her for claiming that she was on good terms with people back home in Illinois, but the local gossip floating around town told a different story. She also drove him up the wall with her lavish tastes and obsessive spending. Her occasional fits of fury were a constant source of tension in their marriage. One time early in their marriage, she was seen chasing her husband down the street with a butcher knife. Why? We can only suspect. Tiger Woods, anyone? Anyway, on another occasion, Civil War officers caught her going off on him for not inviting her to a military review. She kept going at him in front of them, really letting him have it. One of the officers even said that Lincoln handled it like a champ, staying calm and dignified through the whole ordeal, just like Jesus would have. He showed pain and sadness, but kept his cool. During the raging episode, Lincoln tried doing different things to calm her down. He kept calling her Mother, his nickname for her. A curious nickname, I agree, but we shall pass on investigating the psychology behind that for now. He kept pleading with her and begging her, but she still kept screaming at him, and so he walked away perhaps before anyone could witness a murder scene. Unfortunately, her histrionic tendencies worsened as she grew older, but to be fair, like I mentioned earlier, it kind of makes sense given what she went through. And there is only so much pain a woman can go through in this life. So, I don't know if her behavior really warranted what her only surviving child did to her. Robert Lincoln, compared to his plain and agreeable father, was more rigid and uptight. He tried to bear his mother's interference in his marriage as she smothered him and fought with his wife. He bore her quirks, though they mortified him, like her attempts to commune with her dead children through mediums. But he was quite intolerant of one thing, and that was her spending. On this issue, Robert was appalled by his mom's extravagance, and he would not give an inch. The way he went about it, though, was a bit unfair, in my opinion. One morning in May of 1875, 3 men arrived unexpectedly at the Chicago hotel where Mrs. Lincoln was staying and ambushed her. They forced her to accompany them immediately to the local courthouse, where a jury was standing by to judge her sanity. One of the men was Leonard Sweat, a Chicago lawyer who had nominated her husband for president. Imagine the betrayal she must have felt, as now he was representing her son, who had charged her with being insane. The two other men were officers, who came along as backup and were ready to use force if necessary. Sweat informed her that her friends had come to the unanimous conclusion that her past troubles had caused her a great deal of stress, resulting in mental illness. Mrs. Lincoln was astonished, but calmly replied that she was not crazy and was very much able to take care of herself. She asked where her son was, but Sweat went on to inform her that 6 doctors had already diagnosed her with insanity, and that it would be best if she came along quietly. She protested loudly, as she had never been seen by any doctor for any mental health issues. It was clear that the poor woman had no idea that her son Robert had orchestrated her capture. She found out later, though, when he showed up as the star witness against her during the court hearing. Robert was also the one who hired those doctors to testify against his mother. The doctors were part of a long list of witnesses he had gathered and paid off to help make his case, and they were all waiting at the courthouse to pass judgment on the famous widow. When Sweat realized that Mrs. Lincoln wasn't going to come out of her hotel room willingly, he resorted to scaring her into cooperating. He basically said she had 2 options. She could walk out of the room, calm and dignified, hop in his carriage, and head to the courthouse. Or she could resist and get dragged out in handcuffs by his 2 buddies. The second choice would definitely create a spectacle, and regardless of the situation, would muddy her reputation. She became enraged. She started yelling at Sweat, telling him to stop being nosy and take care of his sick wife at home. She tearfully called on God and her deceased husband to make him leave. Sweat patiently endured her theatrics, and eventually she calmed down and agreed to go with him peacefully. When they reached his carriage, still angry, she wouldn't let him help her get in, because she didn't want him touching her. When they arrived at the courthouse, it was packed with a peanut gallery eagerly awaiting the show that was about to go down. The proceedings, however, were briefly delayed because her defense attorney, Isaac Arnold, another Chicago lawyer and friend of Lincoln's, suddenly declined to defend the former First Lady. It turned out that he had also been recruited by her son's camp because they did not want a competent lawyer who could shred the weak case they had brought against her. Sweat was furious. He confronted Arnold, and the two went back and forth over his defection. Who knows why he changed his mind? Maybe he felt guilty for a second and couldn't picture himself locking up his friend's wife. But after Sweat and Robert's camp put the heat on him, he finally came around. What continued was a true kangaroo court. 17 witnesses were produced by the prosecution, including the expert doctors who had never examined Mrs. Lincoln, but who all concluded she was fit for the asylum after hearing her symptoms described to them by Robert and his lawyers. The list of witnesses against her included hotel employees, a housekeeper, a waiter, and a number of sales clerks, who were all brought on to show how dangerously extravagant she was. And lastly, her son, Robert Lincoln, himself. Throughout the trial, not once did the defense raise an objection to any claim or offer any witnesses of their own, or even thoroughly cross-examine the witnesses on the other side. When the all-male jury retired, Robert had the nerve to cross the aisle, approach his mother, and try to take her hand. She swatted him away in disdain. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was back with a verdict: insane. The day after her trial, Mary Lincoln was sent to Bellevue Place. It was a notorious private asylum outside Chicago. To no one's surprise, she spent her time there devising ways to leave, all the while her son worked every bit as hard to keep her in. Her efforts won out eventually, when her sister Elizabeth Edwards offered Mary sanctuary in her Springfield home. Robert was furious. Mary also had advocates in a judge and his wife, James and Myra Bradwell. They worked hard to engineer her release through a public campaign which threatened an open hearing that would show the world just how sane she really was, and the injustice done to her. Though Robert loudly complained about the couple getting involved in his family drama and directly referred to them as pests, 3 months after entering Bellevue Place, Mary Lincoln was released. But by order of the court that had convicted her, Robert still had control over her movements, her money, and her possessions for at least 1 year. Think of it as a conservatorship. #Free Britney, #Free Mary. His continued control over her life suffocated her. Robert's Aunt Elizabeth begged him to loosen up a bit, but he had no intention of allowing any more spending sprees. He was determined to put a stop to any more splurging and made sure to keep a close eye on his mother's finances. It was only after she successfully petitioned the court that her money was released to her. Once she got a handle on her own life, she hightailed it to Europe in self-imposed exile. She fled America partly because she was tired of everyone thinking she was nuts, but mostly because she was worried her son would try to have her committed again. She was gone for 4 years and was so bitter over what her son had done that she refused to communicate with him, and even avoided writing his name. During that time, Robert was so disconnected from his mother that he once told a friend he didn't even know her address, just that she was somewhere in Europe. It took a while, about 5 years after their falling out, but they did eventually reconcile. It was 1880, and Mary had returned to the U.S. due to her deteriorating health. She was living at the Edwards home in Springfield, but did not inform her son of her return. Robert was the then Secretary of War for President James Garfield, and in mid-May, he left Washington for an official visit to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. On his way back, he stopped in Springfield and spent an entire day with his mother. There are no existing records that show exactly how the meeting was arranged, but some historians think that Elizabeth was the one who set it up. For the rest of Mary's life, Robert, usually with his family, visited his mother every few weeks. When Mary stayed in New York City for medical treatment between October 1881 and March 1882, her son made sure to visit her every week. Robert and his wife also worked diligently behind the scenes in Washington to get Mary Lincoln's government pension increased from its original $3,000 to $5,000, the amount that Lucretia Garfield, wife of President Garfield, was given as a pension after her husband's murder. Mary Lincoln died of a stroke on July 16, 1882, and though he planned to, Robert was unable to be by his mother's bedside in her last moments. As a dutiful son, he followed all of her pre-written wishes for her funeral and burial, and a few days later, he had her casket secretly removed from the Lincoln tomb and buried in the basement next to the hidden casket of his father to prevent potential theft, as was attempted of Abraham Lincoln's body. When Robert died in 1926, he believed he would be buried in the Lincoln family tomb in Springfield, Illinois, to spend eternity with his parents, younger brothers, and eventually his own wife and children. Robert's widow, however, changed the plan and had her husband buried in the Arlington National Cemetery instead. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is a story for another day.
Welcome back. You know, it's like I was saying at the beginning. She wasn't very popular as a first lady when Lincoln was alive. But the way she went about things and handled herself and handled her finances and handled her associations with other people made her even less popular after he died. Could it have been handled differently? Maybe so. Do I agree with what her son done? Not the way he done it, but he tried to make up for it after she got out, after she came back from Europe, and in her remaining days. It's really sad that she made such a disturbing name for herself, knowing how beloved and mourned her husband was. Just goes to prove that not always is history so pretty and shiny and clean cut. There is a darker side. But that's all we got for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this look back at the life of Mary Todd Lincoln. Really sad. It's really sad. Really sad. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. God bless you, God love you, we do. And we'll see you out there.